How many hours a week would you say is held up by all the admin and paperwork required to recruit and onboard your staff? Well, today I'm bringing on Julie Schweber. She is a senior HR knowledge advisor over at SHRM, and she is going to help discuss how to streamline your recruitment process to make it painless, how to mitigate turnover in order to recruit less, and how to find hidden talent by recruiting through adjacent skills. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to talk a little bit about how to make recruitment less painful for HR. To give a little background on workforce.com, Workforce is a full service HR software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So think everything from scheduling to payroll to time and attendance to HR and so much more. Workforce actually works with thousands of businesses and helps onboard and recruit hundreds of thousands of staff per year. So because of this, we have insight into common trends and solutions surrounding the most admin-heavy part of HR, aka the recruitment process. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Julie Schweber. Julie, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. Julie is a senior HR knowledge advisor at SHRM, and she has over 18 years of strategic and tactical HR experience for profit and non-for-profit organizations, including FedEx and Icon Office Solutions. Prior to joining SHRM, Julie was a senior HR consultant for more than 6 years and provided Fortune 500 HR expertise to small and mid-sized organizations. So, Julie, you're the perfect person to talk about, the recruiting woes of HR and how much it bogs down the weekly, process of the HR manager.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll kick off with this first question here. I'd love for you to tell me about some of the work that you do with SHRM and just your role as a senior knowledge advisor.
Sure, absolutely. I've been with SHRM going on almost 6 years now, and I started as a knowledge advisor. There's about 20 knowledge advisors, and we're dedicated to answering over 60,000 HR-related questions annually. And there are two of us that are senior advisors, and we often get the toughest questions when someone raises the white flag and say, hey, I can't find a resource, or this is a really sticky one. And then we help research and respond to member inquiries. I also do the training with my partner in crime, Teresa. We do train the new advisors coming on because it's a pretty long process because you've got to be a solid HR practitioner, generalist across the board to answer all of the complicated questions on anything and everything HR that we get on a daily basis. We also do quite a number of media interviews and keeping our folks trained on the most recent updates, trends, or regulations as part of my role as well there at the Knowledge Center.
We actually just had a webinar yesterday with Jennifer Chang, and we talked a lot about FLSA violations, wage and hour laws. So to say the least, you guys are very, very on top of the latest trends, the latest law changes, whatever it is. It's amazing how much you guys have to keep track of. And to say that, your fielding was over 6,000, 60,000, was it?
60,000 a year.
60,000. I mean, that's incredible. That is incredible. So you're the perfect person to kind of dive into one of the more nuanced topics of recruitment, right? So I'm curious, we kind of talked about this a little bit in the intro, but what has your experience been working with shift-based businesses and HR within these industries?
Yes, certainly, with over 18 years plus in HR, with a significant amount of my experience has been in recruiting. And I've worked with a few shift-based businesses, night shifts, split shifts, pretty much any type of shift you can think of. So I do have a pretty good amount of experience and had to do recruiting and even more importantly, retaining those types of folks.
Sure.
So I do have done quite a bit of that.
And in terms of the questions that you're fielding, how often are those surrounding recruiting or the recruitment process and kind of helping to simplify that for those who are calling, emailing in, whatever it might be?
Right. Great question, Meredith. It is always in one of our top 3 topics.
Wow. Okay.
Out of probably 12 topics, recruitment, talent acquisition generally falls within the top 3.
Wow.
So it is a very common question or facts that folks want to talk about it, or they want answers about it, or trends or common employer practices, whatever it might be.
Sure. Get some insight, try to streamline it a little bit more, right?
Yes.
Definitely. How big of a pain do you think it is to recruit, especially in today's labor market? I mean, it's in complete shambles, as we've kind of seen. There was some, maybe more promising headway come in the later half of 2023 in Q4. But, what is it like to recruit in today's labor market, would you say?
Well, let me just say it as nicely as I can. There's definitely a big opportunity in recruitment, okay, where companies have an opportunity to really make it part of their overall HR strategy. Having that recruitment strategy and taking some time to think about it can make it a little less painful. And I think the more effective that we are at doing it, and we'll talk a little bit more in the program today, but there are things that we can do to make it a little less painful, I think, that may be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll definitely kind of dive into that a little bit later on. It feeds me perfectly into this first part of the webinar, how to streamline your recruitment process to make it less painless. I think this, or, make it painless virtually, right? I think that this is a really important topic.
Absolutely.
First of all, I want to focus actually on this very first slide that we've got here on how to streamline the recruitment process. And these kind of 4 simple steps, in a sense, just these 4 points talking about reduce the number of interviews in your process, be explicit about whose decision it is, ask the interviewer or interviewers to use numerical ratings when evaluating candidates. I think this is a really awesome tip. And change your culture to reward those who spot great hires, not penalizing those who end up with occasional poor performer. I think the last one definitely falls within the larger companies, maybe more mid-size. I think those who are a smaller company, who maybe the HR department literally consists of one person, that last point, that bottom right one, doesn't necessarily apply. But Julie, my question for you is, how can HR actually streamline this process, the recruitment process, to ensure a quicker turnaround time and, sourcing, screening, and then hiring suitable candidates in, a multitude of shifts within these shift-based industries?
Right. Yeah. And these are all great points here. I think one of the things that we're seeing more and more of is automating. Having an HRIS system that handles the applicant tracking, the job postings, possibly asking about specific experience or education or certification or hours available to work, for example, night work, shift work, whatever it might be. And also, I think it's important, before we begin our recruiting process, have an idea, and ideally in writing, of identifying the job duties, the tasks, the required skills, experience, and education. I would also, identify who's going to be involved in the interview process. And also, it's important, a lot of companies, sometimes they may not train their frontline supervisors or their managers on how to interview. What should I be looking for? What can I ask and what can I ask? So the more training and the more comfort we can create for our frontline supervisors in interviewing, it's going to make it go a whole lot quicker. Yep. Okay. Plus, it's going to help the organization because they're not asking questions from a legal perspective that they shouldn't be. But also, they may own the process a little bit more, and they'll become more confident in making those hiring recommendations, and identifying what's going to make a good candidate can be really, really helpful. A couple of the other things as I'm kind of going through here, looking at the entire process, the recruitment starts as soon as someone applies, right? Or maybe even before, when you're creating that job posting or that job ad or putting your words out on social media about we're hiring. What does that look like? How enticing is it for the candidates? But also, how long does it take for someone to apply? Are we having them fill out a 10-page application with their life history, or are we kind of maybe simplifying it as much as we can, with just a couple of questions, getting at some key core areas, and then we could further screen if they're meeting, the basics of what we're looking for. So I think that's important. And also, how fast are we moving on candidates?
Yeah.
Companies lose a lot of folks. They want it instantly. Can they apply on their phone?
Mhm.
Okay. Is it a pretty simple process? Because people will swipe next to the next ad. If it's too complicated, takes too long, oh my gosh, they want everything in the universe here that I have to give them, and it's just a simple application. So I would definitely make it simpler, quicker, more efficient, so that you're casting a wider net to bring in those candidates. And going back to this one section on asking interviews to use numerical ratings. Great
Mhm.
idea for your frontline supervisors and your HR folks if they're involved, because it's a little bit more objective, right? And oftentimes it has a checklist of what those ratings are and what we've identified, or what the employer has identified as what we're looking for. 2 years experience, 4 years experience, whatever type of certification or forklift operator safety credential they may have, and we're quantifying it so it takes some of that subjectivity out of the process, all right, which improves everybody's confidence, especially that hiring manager, and it can make it a little bit easier to identify
Mhm.
the best candidate out of the bunch.
I think that's such a good point, especially talking about making sure that, there, first of all, acknowledging that there's a lot of competition out there
Mm-hmm.
for getting hires in the door, making sure that your application process is really easy. We touched on automation. We actually rolled out an ATS, an applicant tracking system, on our side of things. And we did something really cool, which I had never seen before in, the software business. But we actually, instead of having it on, Glassdoor or anything like that, there's a QR code that businesses can print
Mm-hmm.
out from their phone, from their desktop, whatever, put it on their window, and then applicants can literally scan the QR code, easily apply just through the Workforce app, or just through
Mm-hmm.
the Workforce application process. And then that way it gets automatically
Right.
transferred into the back end, the manager side of things. And they can quite literally, because this ATS system is tied in with their HRIS and time and attendance system, they can have
Mm-hmm.
this employee onboarded in minutes. If they qualify, if they hit the mark, again, it's making sure that that turnaround time is quick, that
Right.
there is not a lot of bottleneck happening on either the applicant side, the prospect side, or the manager side. I think that is
Mm-hmm.
so important to note.
Exactly. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And companies that are doing this have a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I swear it's those that are adopting the technology
Mm-hmm.
and taking it in stride. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Are there any aspects of the recruitment protocols that, HR should be aware of, those that are maybe more compliance sided, or anything that's really important to maybe note that maybe some HR are missing the mark on when it comes to just recruitment in general?
That's a good point. I mean, I think a lot of it often may come down into the screening questions, the interview questions,
Mm, yeah.
making sure that we're keeping questions job related, and not about, family or caregiving responsibilities, or future plans, or for family in the down the road, or disabilities that one may have but may not be visible. Oftentimes we want to be careful that we're not promising the job to someone.
Mhm.
Sometimes that can be considered an implied contract, that, oh well, listen, we're gonna move forward with you, you're the great candidate, but then somebody else comes through the door and that person checks all the boxes of what an employer may be looking for. So that's why it's so important to train your frontline supervisors, because they're
Yeah.
often so even more involved in the interview process. And HR kind of already usually knows all of these things, but if we're not sharing and training our managers, compliance issues can be a big problem if employers aren't careful.
Yeah, absolutely. You're onto something there, tapping managers on the shoulder and kind of handing off some of that responsibility to them. Like we talked in another webinar on educating employees, educating frontline workers on the
Hmm.
importance of compliance in this case for that topic that we were discussing. This is really kind of pertinent across the board, right? Where
Hmm.
making sure that managers also have the wherewithal to lead some of these interviews. They're going to be the ones working with these employees anyways, so they might as well have a pretty hefty say in, who's kind of coming through that door. And again, if we're talking about making recruitment less painless for HR, here's a great way to do so, right? Hand off some of that
Mhm.
responsibility. I think that's an awesome, awesome method. And I think it goes overlooked. I think a lot of HR, maybe even leadership, upper management, doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
trust frontline supervisors
Right.
completely to run interviews like that. And I think they put it on themselves, say, no, I got to do this. And they're the ones stuck with the paperwork and everyone's bitter for the, for the, for
Yeah,
the brunt of it. Right. So at the end of the day, handing some of that responsibility off to your managers and leading them through it and educating them on how to conduct a correct interview, how to ask the right questions, what questions
sure.
to follow up with and ask. Yeah. I think that's a great point.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that becomes part of their professional development as well. They've just
Absolutely.
gained another skill set. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody around,
For
including
sure.
including the applicants.
Including the applicant at the end of
Mhm.
the day, right?
Yeah,
Of course. So, how can HR leverage data? We kind of talked about technology. How can HR leverage data to make more informed decisions during the recruitment process?
yeah, that's a good question. With all of the data that is coming through, and it's kind of making me think a little bit, how are we using that data? You know, time to fill, cost to fill, how many days from application to an offer is made. And those are wonderful metrics and key performance indicators. I'd almost want to look at the candidate experience and try to measure and quantify that, because that at this point has become more and more valuable for an employer, I think, to measure. Um, how we treat those candidates post interview or post notification that they weren't selected says a lot about an organization, and that gets out. Looking at your social media, you've got you see this every day. I did a phone screen. I had 2 interviews. I had a final interview with the department. I spent all these hours and I never heard back. Okay. So it can be a big ding on employer's reputation and employer's brand if they're
Mhm.
not following through on these data points. Often companies might even want to do a candidate experience survey, not just for the folks that were hired, right? Hopefully it'll be good, but there's
Mhm.
probably still some room for improvement. But even the folks that you didn't hire, because they could refer your next hire, or they were treated so well and with such respect, they're thinking, gee, I didn't get this job. They told me why. They really wanted somebody with 2 years experience and this particular credential, and I didn't have it, but my neighbor does, my old roommate does, and I'm going to refer them to this company. So again, it comes full circle, and I think that's where a lot of what we don't see. We see data, how much does it cost? Where are our sources coming from? What is our number one source of hires? But are we looking at it from the candidate perspective? And that would
Mhm.
be my challenge to companies today is look at it, even go through, try to apply, see how easy or how simple it is. Give it a test run, kick the tires a little bit, see what it's like.
Yeah, put yourself in their shoes a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah, I
exactly.
think exactly, self-auditing those processes
Yes.
is huge. I mean, I think that I think I was talking to Margaret Jackson. She's the HR director, I believe is her title, of RPM Pizza, and it's a huge pizza chain.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she talks about how they audit their processes, not only just for recruitment, across the board, onboarding, all of it. And they audit their processes, I want to say once a quarter, maybe even more, twice a quarter. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so important. And that's a lot of auditing, right? And of course, it's a really
Yes.
big company. She's not the only HR manager on the team, right? She has other people, other generalists and whatnot to turn to. But I think that is so important, even for smaller companies. If you can audit all your processes a couple times a year, I think you're in good
Mm-hmm.
shape, and making sure that the experience is what you want it to be on the applicant side of things, on the employee side of things, wherever they're in
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
process and the pipeline. I think that's amazing if you can do that.
Yes, exactly. And it's job candidates today are much more sophisticated than they were
Yes,
10 or 20 years ago, because they're researching the companies that they're
absolutely.
interested in, and they have an expectation to be engaged by companies today in a relevant, transparent manner, even
Mhm.
during the hiring or interview process. So that employer brand is very critical to making recruitment less painful, and opening the door to more and more candidates applying.
Yeah. I mean, you hear of companies like, Chick-fil-A, for example, that have that reputation of hiring really great employees and having employees going above and beyond for their service. And it's
Right.
because they're attracting people who want to have that experience. And it's the best branding that you can get. And I understand a lot of companies obviously don't have the skill of Chick-fil-A, let's say, but if you can have that branding just within your small network, within your community. I mean, I just discovered that there are Facebook pages dedicated to, essentially kind of like a Yelp review for communities and stuff like that. And it's amazing what comes up on there and how much you can discover as somebody who is prospecting jobs and looking into companies and businesses, just frontline type of work. And it's amazing what you can find out on social media, as you said.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Are there any specific metrics, KPIs, aka key performance indicators that employees, or excuse me, that HR should focus on when it comes to recruiting?
Yeah. The standard ones: time to hire, time to fill, time from application to time of hire or time of notice when not hired. All right, those are some common ones. The candidate experience, as I mentioned. The other thing that comes to mind that I haven't talked about are how many employee referrals are you getting? Do you have an employee referral program? Are you communicating it frequently to your existing team that here's what we have open? Are we giving them any type of reward for referring and we hire that person? A lot of times it's money. Maybe it's a gift card. Doesn't necessarily have to be anything, but I'll say probably about 90% do pay a small fee, sometimes larger fees based on the position and how difficult it is to fill something. But that should be celebrated and communicated. It's not just, okay, well, here's your check from HR. Are we sharing this with other employees? Hey, we've hired 10 referrals the last 2 quarters, and here are the folks that recommended these people. It's a fun way, but it's pretty easy to celebrate that. And it's even more important too, and here's something HR sometimes can make a mistake about, is even if we don't hire somebody that was referred, we definitely want to connect with that person, have a conversation with them. And then if they don't meet the qualifications or we've selected someone else, it's very important to follow up with that referral, or any candidate for that matter. That's part of your candidate experience. But with employees referring someone, they're going to be less likely if it's a poor experience for someone that wasn't hired. So how we handle that is very, very critical. And I don't know that that's being measured, or is it a KPI, but employee referrals, I think, and then you could measure how effective are they? Are they sticking around with us? Are they getting promoted? Or are they moving laterally within an organization? So looking at how long do they stay and where do they go or not? So I would measure that.
Yeah, I really like that idea of, I think, referrals are an uncommon KPI, but I think it can be very, very well integrated within an OKR. You can talk about it from a quarterly perspective, like, hey guys, team, talking to the team, right? Hey team, let's make sure that we're getting 5, 10 referrals in the door this quarter. And for those that help get a referral in and they hit their 30, 60, 90-day mark, whatever it is, you get a blank gift card, check, whatever the benefit might be there. I think that's really important. And I think it's so key, because not only are these employees, these prospects, already vetted kind of by their friends, by their family members, whoever's referring them, but also, again, it's making your role in HR virtually painless, right? You're barely lifting a finger to get these people through the door. You just got to get them onboarded and you're set there. So it's so, so nice to have that referral program in place. I completely agree.
Right. And the other thing too is once you get these folks on board, some of the metrics are, surveying your new hires 60, 90 days down the road. And, get some feedback on your onboarding, the new hire training, and then looking at, are your new hires, are they successful 12 months down the road? And are they sticking around as well?
For sure. It feeds me perfectly into this next part of the webinar on how to mitigate turnover in order to recruit less. So,
Yeah.
right, kind of nipping the problem in the bud a little bit here.
Yeah.
We're going a little bit of a, back way to around the recruitment process, so to speak. So
Right.
my question for you, Julie, is what effective retention strategies do you recommend for HR to actually reduce turnover and ensure employee loyalty within these very, very high turnover industries?
No doubt. And I'll tell you, I'll string it back to part of that recruitment strategy is developing or defining, if you don't have one, your employee value proposition. All right. And this kind of is step one, and this can go in your job ads, but it also becomes a retention tool. When we've identified what makes our organization terrific, what we do well, what our mission is, what great benefits, perks, or any other distinguishing characteristics or benefits or culture that we offer. Are we, hierarchical culture, or are we flat culture? What's our percentage of promotions from within? That's a story to tell, not just to candidates, but also to your employees. And it should be told. However, that makes sense for a business. Sometimes it's a quarterly team meeting, or it may be a monthly team meeting with the department, and then, an annual, hey, here's our, here's what we accomplished last year, or here's some of our key success stories. But it's important for employees to know their great benefits. And a lot of times, if they haven't been educated or even trained on how to use an HMO or whatever health insurance they may offer, or their retirement plan, or even the wellness phase that has really taken off since the pandemic, wellness benefits. It's great to have them, but if they're up on some shelf and nobody knows about them, it's not doing anybody any good. And they make up benefits often about 35% of one's total compensation package. So do your employees know about them? Do they know how to use them? Are we communicating on a regular basis? And then it's not just about the benefits, it's all the other things. Maybe it's the mission of your organization, or the outcome you're having on the community, or the the world, what, depending upon what you're doing. Or maybe it's some of your corporate social responsibility, what you're doing outside of your organization to help the community, or a particular charity or nonprofit that you've dedicated hours or funds or whatever it may be. So making them realize there's a lot more to their world at work than just their paycheck that they get. All right. So that employee value proposition, I think, is a great retention tool. But again, it isn't told once a year. It's kind of an ongoing process, and making sure frontline employees are aware, or frontline supervisors are aware of it, and they can have conversations. Hey, I see you are interested in, IT down the road. Do you know we have a tuition reimbursement program? Okay. Or, here's some professional development courses, and here's what we have allocated in the budget. So they need to be aware of all these other things that we offer as an organization. And then, of course, the other piece is the culture. What is the culture of your organization? Can you articulate that? Are you surveying employees to find out what's working, what may not be working as well as it could be, and surveying and getting that data and trying to make improvements? All of these sends very powerful messages to employees that we care and we want to keep you. Stay interviews, that's another great retention tool. Somebody, once they've turned in their resignation, it's basically an autopsy at that point. It's kind of too late. But if we've got employees that we know we want to keep around, have a private conversation with them and say, hey, we value what you're doing. You're a superstar. We want to retain you. What can we do to do that? And listen, not everything may be doable, or it may not be doable right away. And a lot of times it's not going to come down to money. It may come down to something else. Well, I'd like to collaborate and work with this team. I'd like to stretch my wings and do some, additional assignments over here in this department. Explore and see what they may tell you. And listening to employees is kind of the final and frontier when it comes to retention. And even if you can't do it, you want to get back with them. If you happen to do a survey with employees, get back with them and let them know, hey, here's some of the suggestions. Here's what we're going to implement. Here's the things that, we're not going to be able to do because of XYZ.
I love that. Getting creative with your retention strategies, I think, is really, really important. And a lot of that creativity, like you said, comes from those conversations with your employees.
Mm-hmm.
It actually really highlights beautifully this slide that we have. If it will load.
Wonderful.
If it will load. There we go. There we go. All right. So this one, top 10 effective employee
Very
retention
good.
strategies. I think it's really speaks well to, a lot of what you talked about, even number, if I can find it, number 5, talking about those wellness, health wellness strategies, talking about, competitive compensation. Of course, bonuses are huge. I really like number 2, pair new hire with a buddy. I think that's really easy, especially for those early 30, 60, 90 days that the employee is there. Of course, thanking your frontline managers. That's huge. A lot of HR consultants and professionals have actually come on and told me about how they have actually handwritten cards in the past to their managers, even to their frontline staff who have come on and really kind of went above and beyond expectations. Handwritten notes go a really long way. And again, like number 10, of course, acknowledge new hire milestones. That is really, really important. I think those 30, 60, 90-day check-ins are huge for that, and acknowledging some of those milestones, taking a moment to sit them down, again, get that feedback. You can really implement that feedback, Julie, as you said, in really creative ways with some of these retention strategies that we're seeing here, and saying, is there a charitable donation you would want us to contribute to? Is there anything that you need to kind of better work-life balance principles that you have in mind? Anything like that, discuss with those employees, and I swear it will go a very long way. But these are just a couple of, effective employee retention strategies that we found here.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We talked a little bit about engagement. How can HR curate a culture of engagement a little bit better?
Yeah, that's always such a wonderful question. And, it kind of starts from when you're bringing them on board and getting them out of the narrow view of, this is my job and these are my tasks. But I find that it can enhance engagement and gets employees to understand the bigger picture of an organization. And that can kind of start, during the interview recruiting process, but also once they are on board, what that new onboarding looks like. Are we sharing, the strategy of the organization, our mission, our 5-year priorities and goals? Okay. And then getting into how their job relates to helping the organization as a whole achieve its objectives. And that should be talked about, also with their direct supervisor periodically throughout the year. Certainly if they're doing a performance review or frequent check-ins, quarterly or monthly, hey, here's our target goal, here's where we are, and here's how you are contributing to that. Yeah. Because then it becomes a much bigger than it's just about my little task and, hey, what's a big deal? Anybody can do this, versus, wow, I'm really part of this great team. Everything I do channels up to, meeting the goals of the organization. And I think listening, like you said, and showing appreciation. Thank you. We appreciate all your hard work, whether it's a thank you note or a verbal with a one-on-one meeting or in a team meeting. Everybody wants to be recognized. And finally, research has shown that, over 65% of employees want to do something that they feel is important to, whether it's, the workplace, their community, or the overall picture as a whole. So can we show them how we're making that difference with whatever it is that we're doing is important. They want to make a meaningful contribution. So let's make sure we're talking about that.
Absolutely. I think there's something to be said about feeling like you're really a cog in the wheel that is turning the organization, even if it's a small way, if the employee is doing more back of house things, or if they're even front of house and, taking orders, whatever it might be, making sure that they're seeing the numbers, I think is really important. Saying, hey, you really contributed well in this sense. look at what you've done for the company. This is really amazing. I think that transparency really goes a very long way. And again, improves that loyalty aspect to the company. And even if, the mission statement isn't necessarily hitting it right with the employees and they're just not connecting to it, that's fine as long as they're connecting to the organization as a whole and feeling like, hey, I'm doing something for the company. I'm not just a sitting duck out here.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Were there any specific benefits or, retention programs that you've seen really, do well and obviously retaining employees with any organizations that you've worked with or, that you've recommended to HR professionals?
Yeah. I think if it's within the budget, some type of bonus program can always be well received as long as the parameters are outlined clearly and employees know fully what's expected in order to earn it. It's normally not a given or an entitlement. It's, hey, or we make it tied to company success for that particular year. All right.
Mhm.
And communicating throughout the year where we are. Recognition and appreciation always go a long way. Promotions from within, getting employees teed up if they're interested in exploring how to obtain other skill sets and credentials or certifications or education. Okay, can be all good tools to help, I think, with that. Some companies have like a leadership and training program. And for anybody that's interested, they will kind of do monthly or even quarterly training sessions where it's getting folks who are interested into moving into a supervisory role, for example. But it also talks about the organization's culture, their internal policies. They're already well versed in all of that anyway, but then it gets into supervisory skill set 101, for example.
Mhm.
So it's a great way to keep that pipeline. And it's another powerful message that we want to keep you. We want you to grow and continue to learn with us. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a supervisory role, depending upon an organization. Maybe it's, gee, I'm over here in department Y, but I've got a similar skill set and I'm interested in department Z down the road. Wonder what I can do. Can I work on or collaborate with a couple of workers in that department, or be assigned for a temporary role for 3 months, depending upon, the circumstances. So always looking to grow. I think professional development is one of the key job retention tools that employers have. And
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons people leave too. If they're not being professionally developed, they leave.
Right. They get bored, they get stagnant, whatever it
Mhm.
is, they're not going to stick around. They don't feel important to the company's progress
Right.
anymore. So, yeah, why wouldn't they look somewhere else and, start from another entry level position because they obviously haven't moved from their own.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
true. We talked a little bit about, work-life balance principles, and I think that ties a lot with flexibility and scheduling. So how can HR introduce the idea of flexibility to help reduce turnover?
Yeah, I mean, that is also right along right along with professional development. That's another
Mm,
big one, and we've seen it with the pandemic. But you know, the reality is not every job can offer a flexibility or work from home. It's just going to depend upon the business, the customer needs, and employee needs.
yeah.
But we're not going to have any customers if we can't meet their needs out there. So sometimes employees have to remember. Oftentimes, an employer may want to have a standard policy or a practice and make employees aware of what are the criteria, and set some employers might have core hours. Everybody's got to be on deck from say 10 to 3, and have those conversations with your supervisor. And usually HR and leadership will set some guidelines. Here's what we need, and maybe brainstorm with the frontline supervisors and figure out how we can offer the most flexible schedule while
Mhm.
meeting customer needs. And sometimes, maybe it can be early morning hours or later in the day, and each of us is a little different and has different needs. What may work for us, but I would certainly explore it
Mm,
while meeting business needs what can we do to be more flexible? PTO, big deal right now, obviously, and being flexible. Folks will usually give you, 110% if we give them a little flexibility when they need it. Whether it's for childcare, elder care, they're sick, whatever the situation is, they tend to give that back tenfold when a company is flexible too.
Yeah, I think the concept of flexibility and benefits really go hand in hand. It's often not looked as it so much, where maybe today employees, especially younger employees within these shift industries, are kind of expecting some sort of flexibility. And a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, don't necessarily have that because they don't have the technology, they don't have the software to do so. We actually have the shift swapping feature, and I was talking to Natasha, she's the manager over at My Health. They have an 800 staff medical center, and they use the shift swapping feature to, obviously swap shifts within employees. They're able to swap them with each other, obviously within the context of qualified employees. And it takes the pressure off of obviously managers and, at the end of the day, HR, to go in line with the topic of this whole conversation. But it's a huge benefit that they actually tout when they're recruiting. And it's really easy because, all the work is done on the technology side of things. Managers just need to approve it. They're like, oh, that's fine. Check, all good. HR doesn't need to do virtually anything. It's all done within, the software itself. So I never really thought of flexibility as the technological aspect of it as a benefit as a whole. Because if you go from a place that has something like the shift swapping feature and you go somewhere else that doesn't, that's going to be a pain. That's going to be so annoying to have to adjust back to go back to, hey, can anyone take my shift on WhatsApp? Hey, can somebody help me out here on Slack, whatever it is. And to have to kind of comb through it and then email your manager, and then your manager turns it down because it's been a couple hours, whatever it is. That is such a pain for everybody across the board, for the employees, for the manager, for HR, because they're definitely getting probably an earload of complaints regarding on how frustrating it is to swap shifts because something came up or something happened, whatever it is. But yeah, that aspect of work-life balance, of retention in this case, it's huge. And it really correlates with flexibility and scheduling. It's so huge. And I really never thought of it until, stories like My Health kind of came about. And I was like, that's totally a selling point that HR can tout. And that's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of feedback, we did touch on this a little bit, but how can HR garner feedback from frontline employees without sending out a million employee surveys and then chasing them down for an exit interview? Because as you said, by the time that they, submit their leave, or, they're saying, hey, this is my last day here, it's too late, right? You're kicking a dead horse at that point. So how can HR garner that feedback a little bit more effectively?
I'll share, a couple of ideas, and certainly small group meetings, anywhere from 5 to 15 or 20, and maybe provide some type of snack or meal, lunch or breakfast. And it's just HR, and you've got a couple of questions, smaller group, and ask, hey, what do you like most about working here? What don't you like so much about working here? What can we do to improve? What's on your mind? What obstacles are experiencing? And their frontline supervisors, although sometimes you're funny about griping or, making any suggestions to your frontline supervisor. So sometimes HR can get that. And I would do several group meetings, kind of take notes, let them know right out the gate, I am not taking names. This is anonymous. But I'll go back to my notes as I'm typing those in and say, oh, geez, 10 people said this. 5 people said this. 1 person said this. I'm going to put this to the side. And then I can summarize that data without identifying who or which department, but share it with whoever it might be, the frontline supervisors, the leadership team, and maybe even come up with some of my suggestions based upon that feedback, some simple, quick hits that we can maybe improve upon. Another thing is, depending upon the business, I know I used to make myself available. Folks were sorting packages on the sort, or loading up the deliveries for the day, and that, maybe just walking around, and if it was new folks and I hadn't met them, I would introduce myself and say, hey, I'm the HR rep here, or hey, Mary, how you doing today? What's going on? And you'd be surprised, being out there on the floor or wherever it needs to be, depending upon the organization, you do get a sense of what's going on, what's on employees' minds, or what they may be struggling with, and you get a pulse of what's happening. And you want to do that more than once a year, because then it's like, why is the HR person walking around? So you're kind of developing that rapport with employees, and you're establishing that relationship so that, if there is something, they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable. Oh, I just saw her last week. She said hello, and they can reach out, or sometimes they'll just start talking right then and there, and that's okay too. But keeping a pulse on what's going on with employees. And it can also be the frontline supervisor or the next level above. Okay. It shouldn't be something that we do once a year, because then it's like, why is the VP here? They get nervous about it. So maybe, more regular presence, and trying to develop some type of transparent communication where folks are comfortable. Okay. And I would even put, my contact information so that they, like in the break rooms, because it was a multi-site, business, and we had locations all over the place. So, you're not going to be everywhere at once, but you can kind of put your, hey, information, if you need questions or any assistance.
Open door.
You're an open door policy.
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
that would be my suggestion.
I love that, because again, when we're talking about making sure that you are communicating with your employees, you have those ideas for retention strategies, and we'll kind of go into this next part in a little bit, but finding that hidden talent, finding those adjacent skills. And the only way you're actually able to do that is by talking with them. And of course, it benefits on the survey side of things, but it also benefits the company as a whole in a lot of different ways. And for those that are thinking, I don't have time to talk to employees multiple times, a year, even if you're already down to once a year, let's say, this is why this webinar is here, right? Making sure that you are streamlining your recruitment process, taking out some of that admin work, taking out some of that burden to alleviate yourself from that, so you can self-audit your processes, you can improve on those processes, you can talk to your employees, your frontline staff more to figure out what those processes needs. It's all about lightening the load on the admin side of things, whether that you're turning to software for that or otherwise. It's all about just making sure that you have the time to talk to employees, talk to frontline staff, whatever it is, just improve on those, like I said, those processes is absolutely key here. And I hope, like this webinar will be a good resource for people to actually turn to and say, all right, what can I do to help alleviate the workload a little bit?
Right. And you just hit on a great point too. It's about HR becoming more strategic and less tactical with the admin stuff, right? Ultimately, that's what HR folks are looking for. And we can add a little bit more value when we can come up with, hey, here's what's going on, here's what employees are concerned about, before it escalates. Okay, before it escalates, because we now have the time to do that, because we've automated and got rid of some of that day-to-day admin stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to go into this next point on finding quote unquote hidden talent by recruiting through adjacent skills. I want to point to this next slide that we have here on tips to identify adjacent skills. So talking a little bit about reviewing resumes to identify candidates' core competencies, closely examine job descriptions and requirements to identify those adjacent skills to begin with, probe candidates to explore their experience beyond their primary expertise. I also think a side tangent from this one is, probe existing employees to see if they have any referrals here, right? As we talked earlier.
Yeah, right.
Another one, talking about leverage your professional network. Obviously, this is a big one. Leveraging those connections is huge. Julie, my question for you is, in the context of shift industries, how can HR identify these adjacent skills that may not be directly aligned with traditional job requirements?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question too. And I think we're going to have to get some input from those frontline supervisors, because they know these roles inside and out, and they are working with these folks day in and day out. So they may be able to identify and figure out some of these adjacent skills, I think. And we're talking about not only from candidates, but even employees when when we want to move them or they are interested in moving to another role. So what can employers do? You know, some may even have, like I mentioned, their supervisors identify employees or the candidates that they've interviewed. That happens a lot. We interview somebody for something else, or for something, but then we realize, oh my gosh, he's got all the skill set for this role. Okay. But keeping those, don't let them just go to the bottom of the pile. Make sure we act on those. Professional development strategies, letting folks know what skills we need now and in the future, and what those folks can do to get those skill sets. Having a lot of companies might have a mentoring or like an internal program, leap or whatever it might be called, something like that, where we are letting folks progress with assignments, projects, temporary space fillers while they are gaining new skills. Sometimes it's a half a day here, a half a day there. Some companies might be able to allow it for a week, some for 2 or 3 months, but it's not always realistic to have it that long, where they're jumping in and learning a little bit about other roles and seeing if their skill set and their interest are aligned with that.
Do you have any examples of, adjacent skills that can actually be valuable within shift-based industries?
I guess, in looking for this webinar, I mean, so many industries are shift-based, from healthcare to retail to law enforcement, packaging, transportation, restaurants, manufacturing, trucking. So it was hard to, all of those may require different skill sets. And here's what I'll say. Hire an attitude, okay? Not a specific skill set or a degree, but we hire for an attitude, and most of that's going to apply to any position. Someone with initiative, someone who's going to take accountability and own that particular task, someone that is, humble. But they're willing to learn. They're hungry to learn. They can also work well as a team, and they've got great communication skills. Now, can you think of any job where that wouldn't apply?
So true.
Right?
Someone who's a little scrappy, someone who can adapt.
Scrappy, that's the word. That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's always been my, never hire a degree, hire an attitude, right? Because you've got 2 candidates. One is the Ivy League educated and never worked a day in his life, versus someone, the first in the family to go to college. They paid for it themselves. They had a waitress, 4 summers in a row, and boy, did they learn about customer experience.
Absolutely.
Who's hungrier? Okay. Who may work a little harder because they have something to prove. So that's probably what I would say.
I love that. I love that. That is so great. How can HR create, cross-training programs to allow employees to actually develop and, showcase some adjacent skills possibly, and of course, in turn, expand the talent base within the company?
Yeah. And, speaking of cross-train, I didn't use that word just a couple of minutes ago, but, that's basically what it is. It doesn't, career progression doesn't always have to be vertical. It can be horizontal. It can be diagonal. Sometimes it's even, downward vertical, depending upon the situation. But as long as an employee is always learning. So you want to have that culture, that strategy to say, hey, we want folks to stay here. You may not stay in our department forever or do this role forever, and that's okay. We list our opportunities for all employees. Everybody can throw their hat in the ring if they're interested. We also have some, weekly, monthly, quarterly cross training. If you're interested in a particular department, fill out, or send an email, or, fill out the cross training form on our on-site portal, whatever that may be. And it may be interesting to talk with employees first to see what makes sense talk with your key stakeholders, managers, frontline supervisors, to find out where we can grow employees
Mhm.
and how long we can bring them over here while they decide, hey, if this is something they may be interested in. Some of these shift industries may have slow periods. In the restaurant industry, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 before the next dinner rush. So trying to identify what's going to work best for that business, but
Yeah.
then having a formal program.
Absolutely. I love what you had to say about talking with other teams, with your frontline managers, and collaborating with them. We actually have this feature called the Skills Matrix, and it allows a really
Yes.
visual aspect for HR managers to really break down the strengths and weaknesses of each employee. And they can kind of see, hey, we actually need somebody to come in and do some more of the heavy lifting here, or we need somebody to be upskilled in this sense because we're obviously really lacking over here. And it really helps narrow down into what really needs to be recruited or what really needs to be upskilled, uptrained, cross-trained, whatever it might be there.
Right.
So that skills matrix is a perfect kind of visual for the collaboration between HR and managers and making sure, hey, we're working together to figure out what needs to happen in the company for obviously long-term success.
I love that skills matrix.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's very cool. It's new. It's awesome. Check it
Uh-huh.
out. But it's very, very interesting to kind of see that breakdown in real time.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect visual for that collaboration aspect.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Are there any specific strategies to identify candidates who can adapt and acquire new skills? That attitude aspect that you mentioned. Do you look for anything there when you're talking or interviewing a candidate?
Sure. And, and some of that, you're going to think of these types of questions, in advance, that behavioral interviewing. Hey, can you give me an example
Sure.
or tell me what your worst mistake was at work? I love that question.
Yeah.
But that gives you a sense of who that person is. Did they take ownership or were they blaming others? Did they share what they did to fix it, and maybe what they learned from that mistake? So that tells us a lot. But having some key consistent interview questions that you're going to ask about, your biggest mistake, or tell me about a time when you were working with someone who wasn't a team player, and how did you handle that conflict? So asking those questions in the interview rather than we usually start out with tell me about yourself, but kind of getting specific examples. Okay. Because they have to think about that. And we want a real example. And you can't really make that stuff up because it's from their specific background. So I think that can be helpful.
Definitely. Are there any success stories or kind of case studies you can share where organizations have successfully upskilled employees based on adjacent skills they've sought out?
Yeah. I've seen it in a couple of the Fortune 500s that I worked at.
Sure.
And the biggest success story I can tell you is a person came in and he started by delivering packages, and he rose to COO. Okay.
Wow.
I don't think it gets much more successful than that. But that was part of the culture. We're here. Everybody comes in. We're all on a equal footing, and that opportunity is there. Working hard, and they could see that. And I would say 90% of the supervisors started out as couriers delivering packages. Okay, so that's another successful story to say that they had skill sets. Obviously, there was some training involved so they can get from point A to point B.
I love that. I love to end with this last question here. I asked all my guests this. What are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that our audience can leave with, in this case, to better make recruitment less painful coming into 2024?
Good one. Great question. Define your employee value proposition if you haven't. Okay. Know what it is. Share it with applicants, but also with employees. My second one is create a positive candidate experience. It will come back to haunt you if you don't, on social media and your referrals and your applicant flow. And then my last one is, following up with all candidates, even if they're not selected. Treat them with respect, show them that you appreciate their time and their presence with applying.
I love it. Julie, thank you so much for coming on. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. I can't appreciate enough how, you came on and gave us amazing information, amazing insight on the recruitment process to kind of help streamline it a little bit better coming to New Year. So thank you so much for your time and energy in this.
My pleasure, Meredith. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. For those who want to check out more content like this, be sure to check out our channel, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, I will see you guys at the next webinar.